So, class number 43 of the Golden Doves, page 8. Monolingualism is predicated upon a one-dimensional concept of language. Language is the way we conceive of language, several dimensions, the multidimensional. One dimension of language is the thought in the mind of the person. The second dimension of language is the second dimension of language is the words, are the words that are articulated. So when we say that there's multidimensional, we mean that there is a dissonance between the thought and the words. Words don't perfectly reflect a thought. But whereas if you have a monolingual view of language, monolingualism means there's a single language, the perfect language. This perfect language perfectly reflects reality, the reality that it speaks of. There's an objective reality out there, and the objective reality is perfectly reflected in this language, right? In that language. Right? So it's monolingualism is predicated upon a one-dimensional concept of language. Why is it one-dimensional? Speech and thought are thoroughly reducible to each other. So you see, that's why it's one-dimensional, because there is no difference between the speech and the thought. Therefore, the semiotic and the semantic are basically identical and must be governed by the same principles. Remember we said semiotic, that's like hieroglyphics. Semiotic level of language is the lexical dictionary meaning of words, right? So the semiotic level of language is reducing language, reducing words in speech to their basic meaning. Whereas the semantic level is where you combine words together to generate new meaning. And in order to combine words together to generate meaning, you need the second or third person listening to the first person to interpret the words of the first person. But if language is perfect, in the case of the monolingual attitude towards language, if language is perfect, then there's no need for interpretation. And therefore, there is no need for the semantic approach to language, right? Because words and speech is perfect, and therefore you don't put words together to interpret or to generate meaning, right? All right, this corresponds with the Platonic view of speech, logos, as apophanis. In Plato, there is logos. Logos is speech, a spoken word. And speech is a type of apophanis, like an epiphany, apophanis, right? That is showing or revealing. Right, so the purpose of the word is to reveal the truth. It's so when you say the word dog is reducible to the dog, right? Or if you say the word tree is perfectly reducible to tree. And therefore, when you have the words Es Hagim, tree of life, you don't need to combine the words to generate the meaning. In this case, Es Hayim meaning integrative knowledge, right? So because the word it just reveals, once the revelation took place, you don't need the word anymore. In contradistinction with the Philonic logos, Philo also uses the word logos, but when Philo uses the word logos, he doesn't use it in the same sense that Plato uses it. This is important. Scholars of ancient antiquity always like to say that Philo was a Greek through and through, and here he used the word logos just like Plato used the word logos. Heck, I use the word logos and I'm not a Greek. And I suddenly reject Greek thinking and I still use the word logos. I use the word memra, the word, right? Does that make me a Greek? But that's what they say. They say because Philo uses the word logos, that it's referring to the same thing that Plato is referring to, which it's not. Philo uses the word logos, memra, in a different way, and we can discuss that. We can discuss that when we get there. My father, when he went to Harvard University, he met Harry Wolfson. Harry Wolfson was a great scholar of Maimonides, and Harry Wolfson wrote about this very subject. And Harry Wolfson, Professor Wolfson, alav shalom, explains this point that Philo's use of the words, the Greek words that the Greek philosophers use, doesn't indicate that Philo himself accepted Greek philosophy. And he shows how Philo's use of these words was different than the philosophers' use of these words. I just want to acknowledge where that comes from. All right. Accordingly, knowledge of the semiotic involves knowledge of the semantic. So when you understand when the word reveals itself, there's no need for interpretation anymore. That's what's meant. Once you have the word, the dog, or the words, the dog barked at the cat, that's a perfect sentence, right? And there is no need to connect and to interpret the words. So knowledge of the semiotic, once you know the dictionary meaning of the words, you understand exactly what was in the mind of the speaker. You see that point? Semantic is what was in the mind of the speaker, right? And semiotic is the dictionary meaning of words. So the dictionary meaning of words completely reflects the mind of the speaker, because Greek is a perfect language, and there can be no dissonance between the Greek words and what these words reveal. In this respect, all knowledge is reducible to what Maimonides designates as sharah el-ism, or linguistic analysis. Right. So sharah el-ism, the word ism in Arabic means word. Sharah means the simple meaning of the word, like the dictionary meaning of the word, right? Right? So sharah al-ism means the meaning, the simple meaning of the word. So let me read that sentence again. In this respect, all knowledge is reducible to what Maimonides designates as sharah al-ism, or linguistic analysis. So sharah al-ism means linguistic analysis, but the point being that we have that level of language and text, right? It's called sharah al-ism. But we have beyond that also, because we don't have a monolingual attitude, right? We don't believe that language is perfect and that language doesn't require interpretation. So we have sharah al-ism, but then we have ma'na, right? Other languages and civilizations, by the very fact that they employ another semiotic system, must be regarded as faulty. Now, look at, for example, English. English is faulty because in English they don't say, they don't say whatever the Greek word is for dog. They use the word dog to talk about that barking creature. So there's something wrong with that language, right? The proof is they don't use a Greek word, and the Greek word is perfect, right? Circular reasoning, anyone? All right. This view of language and knowledge serves as the basis for the Greeks' preference for oral tradition and their distrust of the written word. Now, because language is perfect in the monolingual mind, in the Greek mind, language is perfect, and the word is reducible to the thing, or the thing is reducible to the word, there was no reason to write anything. Once you speak something, the idea that the speaker is wishing to convey to the second person is perfectly conveyed. And once it's conveyed, the words are of no use. Let them disappear, right? We don't need those words anymore. So, so this is why Greeks preferred oral communication as opposed to written communication. Wisdom can only be imparted orally, never in writing, right? So the Greeks considered writing some sort of counterfeit of true knowledge. My father wrote about this in his in one of his articles, God as a Writer, right? Great article. To the Greeks, the sacredness of the book is an alien concept. So, of course, writing is something that is pasul for the Greeks, and therefore they can't have a concept of a sacred text as we do. The idea of a sacred text is really important. It means every word in the text has a purpose. Every letter has a purpose, right? So the idea of a sacred text is something very special that Am Yisrael has, where we take the writing as something that can have no, the writing as something that requires interpretation, and every letter needs to be interpreted, right? The sacredness to the Greeks, the sacredness of the book is an alien concept, right? For them, there's no such thing as a sacred book. Let me see if I can find something that Borges wrote on the subject. Give me a moment. So this is Jorge Luis Borges and his book, Seven Nights, a really beautiful book. What a beautiful book. And he has here something, I believe, which I will be able to find. Here. Yeah. Right. Let me, I'm just going to read this paragraph because it's a great paragraph. Although the cult of those books has been carried to extremes that are perhaps excessive, they are not sacred texts, right? So you have classical works in Western literature. You don't have holy works, sacred works in Western literature. The Greeks consider the Iliad and the Odyssey to be classic works, right? Alexander, as Plutarch tells us, Alexander the Great, that is, kept under his pillow a copy of the Iliad and his sword, the two symbols of his destiny as a warrior. But it never occurred to the Greeks that the Iliad was perfect word for word. Nobody would think every single word in the Iliad has meaning, should be interpreted. In Alexandria, the librarians gathered to study the Iliad. And in the course of those studies, they invented the indispensable punctuation marks. So they put punctuation marks in the Iliad. The Iliad was an eminent book. It was considered the apex of poetry. So they had tremendous respect for the Iliad, an absolute classic by any definition of classics. It was studied, it was reviewed, but it was not thought that every word, every hexameter was inevitably admirable. It was seen as something changeable. You could have said it this way, you could have said it perhaps some other way. And it was studied in historical fashion. It was placed within a context. And here's the key. The concept of a sacred book is something entirely different. So a sacred book is not a classical work, right? Horace said, at times good Homer nodded, right? That's a sentence. At times good Homer nodded. That's a sentence in the book. No one would say that at times the good Holy Spirit nodded, right? It's a remez for something else, right? At times good Homer nodded just means that he nodded. But in the Torah, everything has meaning, you know? Everything needs to be interpreted and understood, and there's mishalim and nimshalim, and right? Right. All right. That's the idea. Right. So to the Greeks, the sacredness of the book is an alien concept, as we just discussed. Concerning the status of the scribes among the Greeks, David Núñez Carvalho noted, not only did the Greeks look down upon written text because they thought oral communication was proper, whereas written communication is a type of counterfeit. But if you were a sofer in the Greek times, you would be considered, something aib. And quoting David Núñez Carvalho, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name. I probably am. These individuals were not always held in the highest esteem, scribes, that is. Among the Hebrews, it was considered an honorable vocation. To be a sofer was a special kavod, while the Greeks for a long time treated its practitioners as outcasts. But among the Greeks, if you're a sofer, it's something that's considered an aib. You don't get an aliyah la Torah sofer, right? It's aib. Okay. Eventually, monolingualism resolves itself into a peculiar form of circular reasoning. I think I mentioned circular reasoning before. Western thought alone is truly philosophical. That is, it may evaluate all other systems, but it cannot be evaluated by any other system. So I can use Greek as the ultimate frame of reference. I can judge English by how close it is to the Greek language. It's close, but not so close. But it's not as bad as Sanskrit, which is really a bad, stupid language, because Sanskrit is really far from Greek. And if you measure Sanskrit by Greek standards, then Sanskrit is really just, what are they even saying, right? But of course, it would never occur to the Greeks that perhaps we should measure Greek in terms of Sanskrit, right? How would that look? So it's circular reasoning. So because you have the best language, all other languages are inferior. And how do you know that all other languages are inferior? Because they're not similar to your language, which is the best language. Similarly, scholarly criticism may be best applied to other systems, never to our own. So we criticize other languages, but we'll never subject our language to some sort of critical analysis. That would not make any sense. As noted by Momiano, it is perhaps characteristic of our time. So again, as noted by Momiano, it is perhaps characteristic of our time that we have so many discussions of the religious ideas of underdeveloped countries. So we're always going to discuss about the religion, the Indian religions, I don't know, the Pakistani religions, and the various, underdeveloped countries, third world countries. But so little analysis of our own religious beliefs with the simple purpose of ascertaining their credibility. We have religious beliefs, but it's forbidden to discuss those. That's what Momiano is saying. He was an Italian professor. Maybe he was referring to Catholicism. We in the Western world have religious beliefs, and they don't call it religion anymore. They vacated God from the world, but they have religious beliefs, for example, that, cows are some sort of scourge on humanity, right? So we have to outlaw cow meat. I just heard Bill Gates suggesting that the industrial world should revert from cow meat to other types of meat made from, I guess, how do they make the other meats? Maybe from roaches, maybe from ants. And he actually said it's, you get used to that taste. I mean, I guess if you're on a desert island, you can get used to eating coconut leaves all day. I suppose, if you're hungry, you'll eat anything. That's true. Mr. Gates is correct about that. But this, so that's a religious belief. Some cow, God made a mistake when he created cows, because cows, they burp and they pass gas and they release methane, and methane is a greenhouse gas. And, that's destroying the world. I mean, thousands and thousands of years, and finally man understands that cows need to be shot in the head. We cannot allow the cows to continue doing this to us. They are destroying the world. The world is heating up. And if you don't believe that, look what happened in Texas. People freezing to death because of global warming. That's real death. I mean, the windmills were not working because it was so cold and people ended up freezing to death. So that's because of global warming. If it wasn't for global warming, you wouldn't need the windmills, right? So they have the windmills, they froze because of the cold air, and now people froze to death in Texas. Circular reasoning, again, another example of circular reasoning, but just works perfectly in the Greek mindset. So that's religion. And God forbid, if anybody listening to this video believes in global warming, I do not want to dissuade you from your belief. I'm just pointing out that it's a religious belief, and that's okay. Religion is usually good. It's usually something desirable. I guess we can debate whether this particular religion is a good one. Another religious belief is we are undergoing a mass extinction of humanity because of global warming, right? So that's, again, I'm just giving examples of religious belief, and there's other religious beliefs that have to do with politics, but those are verboten. I mean, it's forbidden to speak about. I already spoke about forbidden things. I spoke about the idea of shooting cows in the head because, we can't have cows in the world. It's an evil scourge on humanity, mass extinction. There's things to do with politics that I dare not speak about. That's like, if anybody speaks about politics and expresses the wrong ideology, he will be canceled. He will be, God forbid, bad things. That's like, do you see that's what they used to do to the witches? Do you see that's what they used to do to the heretics, right? Do you see that's the exact idea? The religious establishment used to seek out the irreligious people. So there's a lot of religious beliefs. Well, we're just not aware of them, are we? We don't call it religion, because religion doesn't sound good. But functionally and structurally, it's religion. So during recent years in Italy, continuing with Momiano, More scholarly books have appeared on heretical sects than on modern Catholicism. You see that? They're always seeking out the heretics. Momiano points out, why don't we discuss the Catholics and analyze Catholicism? 3 is 1, and 1 is 3. And if you believe that, you probably can accept that we have to shoot the cows in the head for the sake of saving humanity from itself. Continuing, the men who would be able to illuminate the contemporary scene by talking about truth in its historical context have not yet found their public. So by talking about truth in its historical context, interesting. So the truth of the Catholic religion in its historical context, I guess he's alluding to the fact that the Catholic, basically the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church got together and they've done the most odious and heinous crimes. I mean, what the Catholic Church did in the Inquisition is simply unspeakable. It's incredible sadistic behavior, which I mean, clearly incredibly sick people have done these crimes. And those sick people were doing it in the name of Catholicism. So what does that say about Catholicism in the historical context? But as I said, back in the days of Momiano, I think he probably wrote this in the 70s, that was forbidden to speak about. Today you can speak about that, of course, because Catholicism is a religion and we want to denigrate religion so that we can bring up the secular religion of the Green New Deal and all those whack jobs. And in the next paragraph, we're going to be discussing the total library of Borges, which is a fascinating topic, but that will be for the next class.